can probably tell I'm not Nancy Navarro. She will be here this afternoon, but she is not here, obviously, for this moment. We're going to begin with interviews. We're going to have two separate panels. The first panel is going to be Catherine Lowry, David Scull, Sam Statlin, and Michelle Whitaker. If you could please come to the panel. She is not. Okay, well, we'll either that, she can be on the second panel. We can be very flexible. Yeah. And if you could, Mr. Statlin, if you could introduce yourselves, and then we'll start with some pre-questions here.
Well, good morning, everyone. I'm Sam Statlin, resident of Montgomery County.
David Scull, the chairman of this committee for the previous 4 years.
Okay, thank you, David.
Michelle Whitaker, resident of Montgomery County in Kensington.
Very good. Well, thank you very much. And we're going to have, we have 5 questions that are questions, and then any of the, if my colleagues have any other questions beyond. And we're going to start with Mr. Statlin, if it's okay. Please tell us a bit about your background and why you applied to serve as a member of the Public Election Fund Committee.
Well, I applied because I've got many, many years, 50 years of experience as in politics within Montgomery County, including a member of the Board of Elections, member of the Democratic Central Committee, serving on many campaign committees. And that's afforded me the knowledge of current public finance law and also existing state law. And I believe we need, while this law worked really, really good, 95% of the time, I really believe it needs to be tweaked so that we have a better reporting system and so that we can, I'd never understood why we couldn't use the existing system that the state uses. I know it's more detailed, but it's still applicable. And if we could tweak the laws to make things better, I think it could be much more inclusive for candidates and we won't have people screened out because of technicalities. And I'm applying because I think I can make a difference in those goals.
Thank you. Mr. Scull, please.
40-some years ago, as a citizen troublemaker, I drafted the state legislation that created the state's public financing for gubernatorial elections. At the last minute on the floor of the House, way back then, the source of funding was clipped off, so it hasn't funded very many gubernatorial campaigns in 40-some years, but it is why Larry Hogan got elected his first time. And my interest in public financing has always been high, and I was honored to be appointed chair of this committee for the previous 4 years, and I salute Montgomery County, and in particular the council, for spearheading and launching really the nation's first serious effort at public financing of elections. The other places, New York is the closest comparison, with a matching system kind of like ours, but they allow candidates to raise a lot of outside money, whereas this system is the only one that says if you want to participate, you can only raise small amounts of money and you're going to basically rely on the public money. And I think it succeeded terrifically and has obviously been being copied all around the region quickly. I'm very proud of it. I look forward to dialogue on recommendations for the coming 4 years.
Thank you very much. Ms. Whitaker, please.
Hi, I want to just thank you for the opportunity to be here and to share my experience and why I'm very excited about the opportunity to potentially serve on this committee. As you may see in my resume, I have over 12 years of experience in public policy and a communications advocacy background. The last 5 years I've spent working almost exclusively on electoral reform and political engagement. And that's been working with organizations like Fair Vote, a national leader on electoral reform like ranked choice voting, who's Their headquarters are here in Montgomery County. I've worked with state groups and national groups like Common Cause on advancing public financing. Here in Maryland, working in Howard County and Prince George's County with grassroots groups that were advancing the initiative, as well as doing studies across the country on how public financing can be implemented in different ways and the different scales and opportunities that there are across the country to really have better elections. I also have, along with that policy experience, I have practical experience after being a campaign manager for one of the candidates who ran at large using the public financing system, Brandy Brooks, and it was a wonderful experience to really get that practical knowledge of how the system is working, what opportunities we do have to improve the system, how we can make sure that for both candidates and residents alike that they feel that the system is working for them and that their voice is heard. So I look forward to further dialogue. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The next question is, the purpose of the committee is to recommend the amount of money the council should appropriate for the public election fund each year. What experience do you have in researching and reviewing past expenses in order to estimate future expenses? And Mr. Satlin, we'll start with you again, please.
Well, for 40 years, I owned and managed an insurance agency and financial services company. And every quarter and annually, reviewed our budget, and I used zero-based formulas for that, and set the budget for every year. And as an SEC registered financial advisor, I advised individuals, small businesses, nonprofits, on how to budget and do their financial planning.
Very good. Thank you. Mr. Scull.
Having served in the House of Delegates and
There you go.
the House of Delegates and the County Council, I've run campaigns back in the days when they were a whole lot cheaper. My first House of Delegates race, $2,500, primary and general combined,
Wow.
thanks to the
It's gone up a little bit since then.
Indeed it is. New York City has the most experience, 8 four-year election cycles, and year before last, they had a citywide elections, and they predicted 35 million. They actually only spent 14 or 15 million because there were hardly any open seats. So there's a bit of luck in this kind of gaming, and they have a staff of 120 people to help them project. But I think we hit it about right last time. We tried to figure out what's the most that could be required of the fund, and we recommended that amount, and the council and executive agreed. It wasn't all spent. A little more than half was actually spent. But what we avoided, which seems to us really important, is you don't want bad press leading up to the first experiment with public financing. A member of the Republican Central Committee did put a post on the committee website in 2016 saying, okay, here's what we do. We get term limits passed, and then we get our council candidates all filed right away, and they submit their matching requests, and we swallow up the $2 million that was in the fund then and leave the Democrats wondering what they're going to do for campaign money. We didn't need any headlines like that or any columns about that. I think we took the right approach. We appropriated the safe amount. This is not a use it or lose it program. Only the money that's actually earned by council, by candidates gets matched, and that was the basis of our final recommendation a couple of months ago to the council for the coming 4 years.
Thank you very much. Ms. Whitaker.
So my experience working on budgets has been over the last decade. First with the General Board of Church and Society, I was the communications director overseeing a budget of $430,000 that included both salaries as well as working with vendors on various services that we use throughout the year with that organization. In my current position working as the communications manager for Manna Food Center, I do similar budgeting requests and projections on the tools that we're going to use, as well as finding more affordable tools that we can use throughout the year to keep our costs down. And as many of you probably do as well, in my personal life, I have to manage our expenses and make sure that we keep the budget right in line. And I just believe whether you're working with your own money or someone else's money, that you need to take the time and the consideration to make sure that you're using it wisely.
Thank you. Are there any potential conflicts of interest of which we should be aware?
I have no conflicts of interest.
None that I know of.
No.
Okay. And the chair and vice chair will be appointed by the council. Would you be able to serve in either of those roles if asked?
Yes.
Whatever the council wishes.
Yes.
And availability, could you attend committee meetings if held in the early morning, late afternoon, or evening?
Yes, but in the interest of full disclosure, because we've been set so far back on our interviews, I'm leaving the country tomorrow for 3 weeks, so the next 3 weeks is blocked.
Okay.
Yes, no problem. The practice for the previous 4 years was to meet in the evening to be more available to members of the public, and we did get occasional visitors from the public in evening meetings.
Very good. And
I am available. I just want to say that I hope that we can make the meetings as open to the public. As someone who does work full-time and has a young family, I want to make sure that we do allow as many people to participate, but also have a voice, whether they're on the committee or not. So.
And we agree with you on that as well, obviously. I do have a couple of questions, or my colleagues have a couple of questions. Councilmember Glass.
Thank you, Mr. President, Vice President?
Vice President, for the
Vice
moment.
President,
yeah,
okay.
Who can't even figure out how to do these lights. So just bear with me. Go ahead.
There you
Yeah,
go.
please.
Well, you're doing a great job.
Yeah,
thank you.
So far.
Thank you all for your interest and long-term advocacy in all your respective areas. I do just have one question, and it's specifically for Mr. Scull. As the chair of this group over the last 4 years, the original charge was to help to determine the amount of money to go into this fund. And I know you all, we all, the community at large have lots of ideas as to how to reform the system in preparation for the next election, and I know that this council will work on that probably after the budget later this year. But in terms of this organization, this group, how do you think the mission should shift, having gone through one cycle, so if you think it should shift at all in terms of scope of work?
Well, when we had these interviews 4 years ago, Councilman Elrich said, "What's your, spending approach?" And we said, "Well, we're the spenders. You guys have to make the tough decisions." And I think we all came out at the right place. We overfunded what we expected would really be needed, but we did that for a reason, to give the program a solid expectation, and that we would be, in fact, be able to meet the promises that the program offers without having to struggle with emergency and supplemental appropriations in an election year, in which you would undoubtedly be criticized by somebody for favoring yourselves or disadvantaging somebody else. So I think our approach is, and is set forth in our recommendation a couple of months ago, to put in $7 million this time. We're guessing that would be enough to meet all the requirements, but we look forward to working with the council, if I'm reappointed, so that we're on the same wavelength.
Can I jump in on that?
Sure.
I was involved in a lot of different campaigns, and I think David and the committee did just a great job. I think it was amazing how it worked so well in one of the most difficult elections I think we've had in years, with all the extensions and challenges, et cetera, et cetera. But there definitely are certain areas where it should be tweaked. And I think that this committee should make those recommendations and possibly even help to act on them. For example, I really think that we should have a best practices meeting with all of the treasurers of the different committees of candidates who are running for office to find out what areas need to be improved upon, and then work with the state to try and modify the law a little bit so that we can get things done. And secondly, there's a whole conflict here of what the parties could do in working with the publicly funded candidates. Yeah, I can't quite understand why you couldn't go to the Republican or Democratic Central Committees and pick up literature of the publicly financed candidates. I mean, it kind of doesn't make sense. Nobody would be hurt by that. It certainly would be more inclusive. And when I say inclusive, specifically I'm talking to those people who had never run for office before, who had no real purpose within a party, and not the experience of running for office to at least get their literature out. So I think we could be much more inclusive if we could expand a little bit. And I just still don't understand why we couldn't use the Maryland campaign reporting system as it exists. I know it's more complicated, but still, you can just take a look at the reporting requirements, and then we would have an auditable system. There was no way to tell if a person gave $100 or $150 or $200. And for $50 to somebody to have a $50 mistake in their records that weren't correctable, and therefore not be eligible for financing, I think was terrible, and certainly not exclusive. So I think there are a lot of things to be done, but I think the real decision of it is how much authority we have, which I think should be as an advisor to the council to promote legislation, and not, be an entity that is running election laws.
Okay, thank you.
And Ms. Whitaker, would you like to respond to?
Yes, I'd just like to add that I think we need to be able to project with what we know with term limits, what open seats are potentially coming up in the next election cycle. But as there have been recommendations in the past, with the last public hearing that we had, there's a need for funding some type of position in the county that's overseeing the election fund, so that while candidates are running, they have a go-to person. I don't know if the committee would be in charge of figuring out how we would allocate those funds along with everything else, but I think that's an important thing that we may consider. And I think those are, again, as others have said, we need to be able to be flexible to really keep an eye on what's happening and be able to respond to that.
I appreciate your comments, and I'll just say for the public record that while the organization's charge, the group's charge might be at this point in time to set the limits for how much overall funding is available to candidates, as we move forward as a council, I would like to have your thoughts on whatever changes, regulatory changes to the current public financing legislation. So thank you all.
Thank you very much. Councilmember Jawando.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President, and thank you all for being here. Good to see you, each and every one of you. Know you pretty well, and thank you for your service to the county in many capacities. Following Councilmember Glass's comments, which I think were right on point, Mr. Skoll, let me start with you. You said $7 million you estimate. Walk me through the factors that to get to that number, what you're thinking about. You had Ms. Whitaker mention a couple, projecting the amount of seats that are going to be available, potentially funding a county person, if this is even a proper place to do it. And I would agree with Councilmember Glass that I think we need to think about what is the proper role of this committee, if the role needs to be expanded some, or at a minimum take your input as how we change the law, the legislation. But could you talk to me about the factors you're using that to get to that $7 million number, and what you're thinking about to project that?
Well, there will be 3 open seats courtesy of term limits, 1 at large and 2 district. One never knows how many candidates there will be for any seat. There was very little Republican participation last year. That could be different 3 years from now. Typically, a big beneficiary of public financing is the minority party that otherwise has difficulty raising money. And so it was a little surprising that there was so little Republican participation, but national politics clearly has a big impact here in the Washington area. We think 7 million probably won't all be needed, but we think that would be a sufficient number to cover however many hot races it turns out there will be, and the number could be refined as we go forward. We're suggesting that the council start putting money in the fund now and not wait. There's apparently something in the water across the street that makes the county executives reluctant to put more money in this fund. I mean, we wound up everybody agreeing 4 years ago, but building, I mean, who knows how tough the coming years are going to be, and so build it up now before you have a crisis. And so it's just a guess, but it's an educated guess based on how many people participated. Term limits created all these openings, but the public was clearly excited about this public financing scheme. 33 candidates for the at-large seats. Who ever heard of such a thing?
Yeah.
So be on the safe side.
That was one of my thing, and the others you can comment. That was one of my concerns. You have something, there's a lot of excitement, there's a lot of openings, term limits, you kind of had the perfect storm. But now it's also more known, and people know that it's out there, and they saw who, so I think there's a whole set of other people that maybe, that's going to be too hard to do, but saw 12 people qualify in the case, and now, so I think we want to be prepared. I was wondering if, based on your knowledge of New York or other places that have done it, do you see a bump in participation in the next cycle, for example? And so you kind of spoke to that, but I agree with you. I think investing early, making sure there's enough there, you can always reallocate. We could always come back if there's money left over, as we have done this time, and reallocate that somewhere else. So do either one of you want to speak to the
If
fact?
I could just interject, just for a time check, we do have another panel, so.
So, I'm done after
All right,
this.
not to cut you
No,
off.
thank you. I'm done.
I'll just add that it will be important to kind of just, as much as possible, read the tea leaves about where we think things are going. When we look at past cases like Connecticut, which has been using public financing for 10 years, 80% of their legislators are elected through public financing. So it's obviously something that catches on and continues to have more wider use. And so I would expect it to be something that we would see more candidates, new candidates taking it on, especially, as well as all of you, if you're running again, to take it on if you would like to use that system. So we need to just figure out kind of what the right number, and we can use past elections a little bit to project, because we had 3 times as many people run in this election because of the term limits. But if we look at similar elections in the past, we could probably project a good number of, based on the number of seats we have available and how off-year elections work, where we kind of see the number of people that are running.
Thank you.
As chair of the Board of Elections, we were always in a position where we had to submit a budget. And unfortunately, we had no idea what we would need, because the legislation, we needed to wait for the legislator to pass legislation. So, for example, early voting sites. We started with, I believe, 5, and we wound up with, is it 8 now? And those 3 were not funded, so we had to build a budget in anticipation of. And there were other examples of that within the election process, and this is, very similar to that. But I think that David and the prior panel really did a great job, and I think caution on the side of too much is better than too little. So I think we're going in the right direction.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Rice, please.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Vice President. And so folks know that while I'm like public campaign finance, I have some significant concerns. And one of them, Mr. Scala, is what you addressed in terms of that the cost of elections continues to go up. And the reality is that public campaign finance doesn't stop that. Now, we have 2 things that are in the way, 2 little small Supreme Court cases that limit us from making limits in terms of elections. But I'm curious as to, for the candidates that are before us, whether or not you see affordability as still a limiting factor, understanding that when I look at the cohort of people who ran for office, that may be young, that may be people of color, that it was still small, significantly smaller. When we look at the number, and everybody touts this huge number, the reality is that when I ran for the open seat in District 2, we had 5 people running for that seat on the Democratic side and a couple on the 3 people on the Republican side, so 8 people for 1 seat. So not really that much different, and well before public campaign finance. So when they have open seats, people are going to run for them. So I think that we have to be very careful about what we say about public campaign finance being the reason why people are running, and not the fact that it's just an open seat and people here in Montgomery County are engaged. But I do want to get into the meat of this, which is affordability. Because at the end of the day, a young person, especially a person of color who's not of means, is still going to look at a $250,000, $300 price tag, regardless of whether it's coming half from or 60 or 70% from public election funds, and still say, I can't raise that kind of money. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. And this is for all of you. This is for all of you.
Okay. Shall I get to the water first, right?
Sure.
If I could please ask to keep
I really-
your
yes,
answers succinct, because we are on a time check here. Thank you.
Look, I think to be inclusive is very, very important. And I like seeing blacks and Latino and Asian, and I want to see as many people running for office as you can. And I think public financing encourages that. But when you come down to the bottom line of all of the numbers of candidates that we had, what did we have, 39 people at one point, running for one race? It's still, reaching those dollar amounts is still a tough barrier. And that in itself weeds people out. And without experience, you're dead in the water. So I think that in itself limits what we're going to spend on public financing.
Mrs. Cole?
Well, I'm sure all the would-be candidates would be delighted if the council were to increase the matching ratio and raise the ceilings of public money that's available. And of course, that's the tough decision that falls to you all every year. Because of the Supreme Court cases, we haven't ruled out, and we couldn't, even if we wanted to, rule out people who are self-funding huge amounts of money. That's the Constitution says that can be done. And public financing, I think there's a huge public appetite for a different method of funding election campaigns than special interests. And the popularity of this program is Exhibit A for the country on that front. So, decision will be how generous to make it and how much money. I mean, the state legislators like the idea too, and I think they like the idea of the county paying for at least part of their campaigns. So I expect that will come up to you all. But I think this was a huge success last year. A lot of groups that have never been visible in county politics emerged and made serious efforts. So I think it's the wave of the present and the future. And the question is just what you pinpointed. How much can we afford to spend?
Please.
I would just say, after running a campaign under the system, there was no, I think, assumption from our campaign that all public financing dollars is how we would run the campaign. We knew that we had to raise additional funds, and I think all of the candidates did that in some way or form. So public financing is a tool to help all level the playing field, whatever terminology you want to use, to allow people from lower income backgrounds, from different communities to be able to compete. I think that there's additional training to make sure that people understand you do need to do the work to raise additional funds, and it's not just relying on public financing. We see that in other places where they use public financing dollars. It's not those alone that are what they're using in their campaigns. And it should be a tool to help make sure that we have more people who want to be able to run, but that's not the exclusive funds that they're going to be used to run their campaign. And I think that while there are some increases in expenses, there were some really effective campaigns, even though they didn't win the race, but were effective in terms of using whether new technology, stronger grassroots campaigns just to do their engagement. And I think those are opportunities, again, where if you're smart with how you're using the money, it's not a matter of like how much you raise, but what you're doing with it.
I will just say it's kind of interesting. I think that every person here on this day has outspent me, and I didn't participate in public election campaign finance. So I didn't spend any taxpayer dollars and still spent less, and won against a person who raised a lot of money via public campaign finance. So anyway, thank you.
Thank you very much, and we thank the panel for being here. The next panel that we're going to have is Mrs. Lowry. Did Catherine Lowry come in? If you could please come down as well. Stephen, I believe it's Whited, Lee Annis, Nancy McMahon Farrar, and Tim Willard. If you could please join us. Okay. I was going to say you can move, rather than be in front of the screen, you could move over to the other side there. And if you could, once you are seated, we'll hear who you are, please. If you need to touch the microphone at the bottom, there we go. And your name, please.
Catherine Lowry.
Okay.
Lee Annis.
Okay.
Tim Willard.
Good morning, Stephen Whitted.
Nancy McMahon Farrar, resident of...
You need to touch the microphone. There you go.
Nancy McMahon Farrar, resident of Montgomery Village, Maryland.
Thank you very much for being here. And as you heard from the previous panel, we have a few questions. Tell us a bit about your background and why you applied to serve as a member of the Public Election Fund Committee.
Okay. I've lived in Montgomery County for 25 years. I was really excited to see public financing come online. I'm a psychotherapist. I'm a small business owner. I have a private practice in Silver Spring. About 2 years ago, I started a small neighborhood activist group, which some of you all know and have had interactions with us, called Capitol View Democracy Crew. And right now, one of the things we want to focus on is how to enhance or improve the public financing system.
Thank you very much. Please.
You
You need to touch the microphone, please.
I was on the previous commission. We helped get things started. I think we got it off to a good start under Chairman Skull. I've been active in county politics, but more at the state level and national level for the last 35 years or so in Montgomery County. I've lived here since 1964. I teach at Montgomery History and Political Science. I have a pretty good grounding in American politics as well. I think this is a system that we need to keep going, as well as fiscally responsible. I think you can find in my motions in the minutes, you'll find that I was the one who was encouraging very often that we make sure that things are on a sound financial footing. I think this is a program that we need to keep going sharply, but again, fiscally responsible, and I'd like to serve another 4 years.
Thank you. Mr. Willard, please.
Well, my background is that I have a PhD in history. I worked for 26 years at the National Archives, after which I retired and became a full-time grandpa. I've been working with the Green Party for 2 decades, and I have run twice for county council at large. This most recent time I did attempt to participate in the public financing program. And most of my experience is working with grassroots community organizations across a wide spectrum of issues. And I'm running I'd like to apply for this committee because, well, for one thing, I was one of those candidates who was disqualified on a technicality the last time. And I think I can bring an outsider's perspective that may have some good ideas to offer.
Thank you. Please.
Good morning, council members. My name is Stephen Whitted. The reason I'm involved in this process is I love Montgomery County. This is my home county. I lived here initially back in the 90s, raised my children here, moved away, and back here now, having bought my second home here in Montgomery County. I'm an attorney. I work with government. I've worked with government for 16 of the 27 years of my now tenure as a licensed attorney. I practiced law in Montgomery County, had a small business in Montgomery County. In sum, I love this county. In the larger sense, I'm concerned about campaign finance reform in this country at large and what is going on with our elections. I think what happens here is a microcosm and can start a wave for what can happen across this country. So I'm looking to get involved to assess what's going on here and begin to make some changes that affect our country at large. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Farrar, please.
Again, my name is Nancy McMahon Farrar. I'm a retired United States Air Force officer, and I've been a resident of Montgomery County since 2000. As a serving military member who was never stationed in my home state during elections, I was always sure to register to vote absentee and to educate myself about the candidates and issues up for consideration. Though I was not able to become directly involved with our political process while serving in the military, upon my retirement in 1998, I volunteered to serve as an election worker concurrently with my registering to vote in Virginia. Following my marriage and relocation to Montgomery County in 2000, I again registered to vote and volunteered as an election worker. I was soon asked to become a chief judge, a position that I served in until after the general election in 2014. Since then, I've trained for and served as a voter registrar, and am currently serving as a liaison to the County Board of Elections. I'm applying to serve as a member of the Public Election Fund Committee because I feel it's important that those who seek elective office are afforded the opportunity to do so and not be hindered in that pursuit, in part due to financial resources disparity. Thank you.
Thank you. The next question is, the purpose of the committee is to recommend the amount of money the council should appropriate for the Public Election Fund each year. What experience do you have in researching and reviewing past expenses in order to estimate future expenses? Please.
Hi, Catherine Lowry again. I would say really my only experience in this realm is running my own business. I don't have any sort of professional capacity beyond that.
Thank you. Mr. Ennis.
As far as just my own background, I can always say that I've been a deficit hawk everywhere. I think Chairman Skull can attest to the fact that I did raise several motions, some of which passed, most of which did not, to limit funding, although we did make sure that we pushed it. But that is my fundamental experience.
Thank you. Mr. Willard.
Well, I have a lot of experience with researching in general with my background in history and working at the archives, and I'm the sort of person who likes nothing better than to curl up in bed with a good database.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Willard. Next question, please.
And I have reviewed the minutes of the previous commission, and I'm familiar with how much they spent and how much they returned. So I feel I could do a good job on the commission.
Thank you very much, Mr. Whitted.
Thank you. With having worked the last 16 years of my career as an attorney and working with government, essentially as a fiduciary to make recommendations to the county council, my bosses, about the settlement of funds, which involve the public trust, the public fisc. I would only imagine over 16 years I've made recommendations affecting millions of dollars of taxpayers' monies. And that analysis is gotten at by looking at prior jury verdicts, prior settlements, to really kind of confirm the figure I'm recommending to my superiors about what to do with the public's money. So I'm very conscious of, one, that these are taxpayer dollars, They have been given to the government, but they must be expended in an appropriate way. Every dollar must be justified of the taxpayers' money.
Thank you, and Ms. Farrar. And Mr. Whittick, if you can cut off your mic, and Mr. Annis, if you can cut off your, thank you.
Council member, do want to mention one thing. I do have a
Yeah.
background in accounting. I did prepare to take the certified public accounting exam some 30 years ago. I did not take the exam. I chose to become a lawyer instead, but I do have an understanding of accounting concepts still at this point.
Very good, thank you. And if you could still cut off your mic. There you go. Thank you, Ms. Farrar.
Now I'll cut on my mic.
Okay.
All right. Council members and Mr. Vice President, let's see. I served during my time in the military. I served as a systems program manager for the NATO 3 communication satellite program. Additionally, I've served as a past performance chair on a source selection team for another major military satellite communications system. Both of those becoming very involved with looking at the financial paperwork submitted by the programs. I served as a development officer for American Mensa. As such, I was a statutory member of the American Mensa Finance Committee, which reviewed historical expenses, preparing future year budgets, and also out-year planning. From 2004 to present, I've been an officer and board member of the South Village Homes Corporation in Montgomery Village. In addition to the monthly view of our financial statements, most years I also served as a finance committee member charged with submitting the HOA's annual budget. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any potential conflicts of interest of which we should be aware?
No, there's no conflict of interest.
No.
No, I have none.
You need to cut on your mic, please.
I've obtained an ethics opinion from our Office of Accounting and Ethics in Prince George's County. I have been cleared by that committee and also the county attorney to participate in this committee.
Thank you.
Having reviewed the county and state ethics guidelines, there are none that I am aware of.
Thank you. The chair and vice chair will be appointed by the council. Would you be able to serve in either one of those roles if asked?
I believe so, yes. Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yes, I would.
I will.
Having served as a board officer in a number of organizations, I'm familiar with the responsibilities of those roles, and yes, I will serve.
And availability, could you attend committee meetings if held in the early morning, late afternoon, or evening?
My availability might be a bit of a challenge. I'm employed full-time. As I said, I have a private practice. Realistically, my availability is Thursday afternoons and weekends. This was, hard to get to here, so I don't know if that's how big a factor that is.
Thank you.
But, thank you.
Yes, both on the redistricting commission on which I served and on the Public Finance Commission, Chairman Ty and then Chairman Skull have worked to make sure that everything has been convenient, and I think Chairman Skull can attest to the fact that I was not the one who made scheduling hard.
Thank you. Mr. Willard.
Yes, now that my grandson is in grade school, I have a great deal of flexibility when I can meet.
Thank you.
Yes.
I am retired, and I can adjust my schedule to accommodate the needs of the committee.
Thank you very much. We do have a couple questions. Councilmember Glass, please.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. I already made my thoughts on this subject known, but I would like to ask you all, for parity's sake, what you think we need to do moving forward, having gone through one cycle with the public election fund, how it should be reformed in any way.
Thank you for the question, Councilmember Glass. I think there are lessons to be learned both from our experiences this first time through and also experiences from other states that have more familiarity and more practical experience with the public election financing. And we need to look at those, see what the best practices have been, and I look forward to working with I do look forward to working with the council to adjust the process, tweak it, as I think was said earlier, as needed. Thank you.
Of course, we learn from past experiences here and also, I think, in the country at large. However, history is not always a prologue to what goes in the future. I think we need to, this will evolve, and I think need to be in touch with the council members, the committee at large, talk about what is happening, what can be adjusted, even as the committee is moving forward throughout the election cycle, to remain flexible. This is a developing process with only one cycle under this law at this point. So flexibility, I think, is a touchstone for going forward with this. Thank you.
Well, I believe the funding aspect of the committee went very well the last time, and I really congratulate the previous committee. But I do agree with the gentleman on the previous panel that we need to look at some possible tweaks to make it more user-friendly. There were some aspects of the program that were a little confusing and difficult to work with. And I feel that while this program is a great opportunity to open up the process, it's still, as it is, it's very difficult for someone who's more of an outsider to raise the money solely within Montgomery County. And so we might want to talk about that as well.
I think we need to look at comparable practices in other jurisdictions, of course, but I do think following many of the same practices we did last election that worked quite well for Montgomery County. I think I would go probably a little bit cheaper than Chairman Skull suggested, as I recommended before. Other than that, I think we did fine. I think we should keep going, but make sure that we're not blinding our eyes to what may be improvements that we can find elsewhere.
I have heard from quite a few candidates a lot about the sort of technical difficulties they had utilizing the system. That seemed like there's a lot of improvements that could be made there. And our group has also started to look into the idea of maybe possibly whether restructuring the amounts of what qualifies at a given level might basically level the playing field even more. It does seem like there's a little bit of it's still a little difficult for a candidate to go to lower income neighborhoods and have that be viable for them. There's still sort of a push into, the more socioeconomically advantaged neighborhoods. So I think there could be some improvements there that would really democratize it further.
Thank you all for sharing your thoughts. Thank you for stepping up and expressing interest in moving this issue forward.
Thank you, and I know that Councilmember Rice wants to speak, but I did want to point out, Mr. Willard, that you can raise money from outside Montgomery County. It's just that you don't get a match if you raise money from outside Montgomery County. I wanted to be clear on that. Councilmember Rice, please.
So let me try and be more succinct about my question and statement. What I saw was that people who were, and I'm going to pick up right where you left off, Ms. Lowry, people who were advantaged, who had circles of influence and networks, were able to tap into those, which is what typically happens when people run for office. And those are the people who typically are successful because they can raise money and get their message out. The idea with public election, with the public election fund, was that somehow we were then able to level the playing field and say that lower income folks, folks who don't have those same sorts of networks, could now be viable players. While I love all my colleagues up here, I can tell you right now I know every single one of them and know that they're very well connected. And it's not anything to disparage them, it's just that they've been involved and engaged in this process for a very long time and know a lot of folks. And so the folks who won are the folks who did that. So when I look at the success of the program, successes should not just be measured by the fact that people participated and got some public election money. It should be that we're actually enacting some sort of change. And so from that perspective, when I look at it, I wonder what kinds of suggestions would you make to, and Ms. Lowry, you kind of already touched on this, but how do we make our public election fund that I still support, right? How do we make it more equitable from that standpoint to address that disparity that continues to exist. So I hope that's more succinct.
Are you asking for sort of more specifics or? Okay, well, I mean, one of the things we had talked about, sort of floating around as an idea, is that the amount could be reduced of the, basically like the minimum donations, and then the amount to qualify, at least for that initial round of public funding, so that if someone was in a neighborhood where a $5 donation meant a lot coming from someone, that they could still have a way to get to public finance rather than, of course, I've got to go get everybody who's going to give me 50 or 150 because I'll get there faster. So that was so that it could come in waves potentially, and again with the goal of making it as sort of advantageous to campaign in a lower socioeconomic neighborhood as in a high one. Okay.
I think we need to understand that public financing is a help, not a panacea. It's not going to solve all problems. I would be inclined to perhaps lower the limits that candidates might be needed to raise before they get money. At the same time, I want you all to make sure that we aren't funding perennial candidates. That's not what the taxpayer needs to do to raise candidates who don't belong in government, to make it easier for them to run when they can't raise their money, in part because of their weaknesses of their standing in the public or whatever else.
Well, I definitely agree with you that the people who are most successful were people who already had a lot of connections, and that it's still a bit of a bar to outsiders and poorer, younger candidates. Of course, we always want to achieve a balance between not funding people who are not making a serious effort and excluding people who are making a serious effort but just having a hard time raising the amount of money needed for matching funds. But I do think we could consider lowering the limits needed to qualify for the system.
If our government is by the people and for the people, then every person should have a voice. Every person should have an equal chance to have his or her candidate heard and to run and a chance to be successful as any other person. It should not, the result should not be that only the wealthier or more well-funded candidates have a greater access for being elected. So the public finance system is not a full force of funds. I think people should get in touch with, have a grassroots-based campaign and raise money from the grassroots level, which in and of itself is a good thing. But then also, if we could modify the system to equalize things or make it a little more fair, then that's the approach I would take with it.
Thank you for the question, Councilmember Rice. What I would do is, as has been mentioned by several of the other candidates, I would be in favor of lowering the limits to enable more people to qualify. And additionally, because it's also been mentioned by some of the people here that the process seems to be a little difficult to navigate, to ensure that training or counseling is made available by the county to any candidate or any candidate's financial manager who requests it, so that they don't run into pitfalls as has happened with some other people. Thank you.
Thank you. And Councilmember Giwando, and might I remind you, please, that we do have a rest of a meeting. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. I will be brief. The program, having participated in myself, I think did do some of the things we wanted it to do. In the case of the at-large race, while many of us have been working in the community for a long time and got elected, some people who had just moved to the county. My now good friend Brandy Brooks came in 6th and was known by nobody, and is not a high-income individual. and use the system, I think, in a very advantageous way to get a lot of small donors and meet people. And it also benefits voters, because I can tell you the incentive structure is totally, when you participate in public financing, is to talk to actual county residents who are voters. And every dollar matters, and it's on equal footing. $5 from a rich person is the same $5 from a low-income person. $150 from a middle-income person is the same $150. That being said, could we do more to make it more accessible? The point you made, Ms. Farr, is, I think, a great one. Navigating how to do the process is a big problem. I also think we should look into potentially lowering the amount threshold, but also raising the amount of individuals. You know, you kind of maybe have a swinging scale, because if you can get 1,000 $5 contributions, that shows you're willing to work hard and you're committed. You might not be able to get to the $10,000 threshold, but you worked pretty hard to get 1,000 people to give you money as opposed to 500, which is what it was set at in our race. So I think we can make improvements, but I do think we're off to a good start, and that it has had the effect of limiting the interest of outside money, but also encouraging us to talk to Montgomery County voters. So more of a statement. You don't have to comment, and I appreciate the time.
Thank you very much, and we thank the panel for being here. All right, we are going to continue our meeting, and the next item that we have is invocation. And we're very pleased to have Rabbi Andret Drucker, who's the Jewish Millennial Engagement Project, to be with us. And do you want us to stand, or? No need to stand.
Good morning. It's an honor to be here with all of you. My name is Rabbi Adaret Drucker, and I co-direct an organization that builds Jewish community among 20s and 30s throughout Montgomery County, DC, and Virginia. I live in Bethesda, and my colleague lives in Northern Virginia, and we're supported by close to 19 synagogues and the Federation and other innovative organizations trying to make connection for these individuals. So thank you for having me this morning. As we join together in prayer, I invite us all to take a moment.
She said not to.
If it is your custom to stand, you may stand.
Okay.
It's good exercise. As we join together in prayer, I invite us all to take a moment to recognize and reflect on each of our individual and collective blessings on this beautiful spring morning. We are in a season that reminds us to celebrate renewal, new beginnings, and the journey from slavery to freedom and from suffering to healing. With this foundation of gratitude, I would like to bless us all with the ability to continue to listen deeply and speak sacredly to one another throughout today's meeting and all of our gatherings moving forward. May we find continued strength and courage as we strive to work for a better tomorrow for each of the citizens of Montgomery County. May our time together today be guided with hearts that are open and full of compassion, justice, humility, loving kindness, and the desire to see the good in each and every person, and to be reminded of our equality as fellow human beings, as we are each created in the image of the divine. And together we say, Amen.
Amen.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rabbi. The next item that we have is a presentation, and that Councilmember Albornoz is going to be doing that for us, please. I was going to say, you're working on that project. On that
Buenos
project.
dias. What a beautiful day. And today we are celebrating, or this week, the 100-year anniversary of Easter Seals. And so I have a proclamation here. Easter Seals is really a remarkable organization. They have a dynamic facility in downtown Silver Spring that is a multi-generational facility serving among our most vulnerable populations in Montgomery County. I've had the opportunity to visit Easter Seals on several occasions and have been very impressed, not only with their operation, but with their board and the public-private partnership, the technology that exists within the facility, but most importantly, really dynamic staff that understand and value the needs of our community and residents. And so I, on the most recent occasion, had the opportunity, as an example of that dedication, heard about a remarkable partnership with a salon that is located in actually in Wheaton, the Hugo Salon. And the volunteers from the Hugo Salon were actually recognized last night at the Volunteer Service Awards in Montgomery County And through this partnership and alliance, salonists come to Easter Seals to provide haircuts and to provide salon services to some of their participants who otherwise would not be able to even wash their hair on their own. And to have it be done professionally is really important and underscores the value that Easter Seals and their remarkable collaborations bring to our community. So I did not want to miss this opportunity to acknowledge 100 years of remarkable service. And so we've got a proclamation here that I will read, and then we'll have you say a few words on behalf of the organization. So here is my second proclamation ever. Easter Seals was proclamation of Montgomery County, Maryland. Whereas Easter Seals was founded on April 22nd, 1919, to highlight and address the health care and service needs of children with disabilities, and whereas on April 22nd, 2019, Easter Seals celebrated 100 years of service as a leading advocate and service provider for people of all ages with disabilities, special needs, active duty military, veterans, and their families. And whereas since its inception, Easter Seals has strongly advocated for essential services and supports for individuals with disabilities and diverse needs, including authoring a 1931 Bill of Rights for children with disabilities that led to government-funded disability services, and the organization is now a leader in inclusive early care and education. And whereas Easter Seals exponentially expanded its children-focused mission during the last half-century by opening its programs and services to include adults and veterans with disabilities or special needs and military families, and whereas Easter Seals has grown from its humble beginnings to become a leading nonprofit organization that delivers high-quality local services and supports people of all ages to achieve their potential and live meaningful lives. And whereas during our anniversary year, Easter Seals recognizes its impact over the past 100 years to the lives of millions of Americans across the country and recommits to expanding possibilities for children and adults with disabilities, veterans, seniors, and others to ensure that every one of us can live, learn, work, and play in our communities. Now, for there it be resolved that Montgomery County Council of Montgomery County, Maryland, hereby congratulates Easter Seals on 100 years of service and encourages all residents to join in celebrating and thanking Easter Seals and its many dedicated individuals that are contributing to the outstanding 100 years of excellence and making profound, positive differences in our people's daily lives and helping to create more hopeful and inclusive communities, which is the legacy of Easter Seals, D.C., Maryland, and Virginia. Presented on this day, 30th day of April in the year 2019, signed by myself and Council President Nancy Navarro. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, thank you. We're very proud to call Montgomery County home for Easter Seals, D.C., Maryland, and Virginia, and to have our flagship Harry and Jeanette Weinberg Intergenerational Center here. That center encompasses, as Councilmember Alvarez shared, a medical adult daycare, the Morris and Gwendolyn K. Fritz Adult Day Services, the Safeway Inc. Child Development Center, where we provide inclusive care for children with disabilities and special needs, as well as typically developing children, and Little Warriors, the children of wounded warriors who are recovering at Walter Reed, so that they can all be together, learning and growing and getting prepared for kindergarten. The Stephen A. Cohen Military Family Clinic, which provides medical adult daycare services, mental health care services for veterans and military family members, regardless of their discharge status. And our Veteran Staffing Network and Edison, Easter Seals Disability Staffing Network, to ensure that we have great career opportunities for veterans, military family members, and individuals with disabilities. Montgomery County and the council have been huge supporters, first in the initial construction of the center about 10 years ago, and then last year as we renovated to add the new Stephen A. Cohen Military Family Clinic and to grow our other services. So thank you for your support.
Thank you. Some pictures. My colleagues want to stand.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Congratulations. The next item that we have is the consent calendar. Oh, no, I'm sorry. I understand that where there is no calendar changes or petitions, is that correct? That is correct. And then we have been, the April 5th, 8th, 9th, and 10th, 2019, as well as the closed session meeting of April 8th, 2019, the minutes have been distributed. Are there any corrections? They stand as written. The next item is the consent calendar. We need a motion to approve it. It's been moved by, I don't know, Councilmember Rice. It's been seconded by Councilmember Reamer. No lights are on. All those in favor of the consent calendar, please raise your hand. And that is unanimous by those present. Very good. The next item that we have is the district council session. And that's from the hearing examiner's report and recommendation for a local map amendment, H-129, for amendment to the zoning ordinance map for the properties located at 9920 George Avenue and 2106 Belvedere Boulevard in Silver Spring. The Fed committee recommends approval, and the Fed chair, did you have anything to add to that?
This is a project in Forest Glen, and we could ask Lynn to give us an update or just an overview. I think it would be also helpful. I believe this is the first district map amendment of the new council, so perhaps to just, maybe Jeff could just,
Just 2 seconds here.
just describe what we're doing here for all of our benefit. I'm not going to say it's just for the new council members. I think those returning probably would appreciate it too.
Okay, first of all, this is the first local map amendment that the council has.
Yeah.
Number one, it's these items on zoning changes come directly to the full council. There is not a Fed recommendation on this. This is an on-the-record decision by the council. The hearing examiner goes through their own hearing and reports back to the council. This is regulated by the ex parte rules of the council.
And even more simply, when a property owner wants to have a rezoning of their property, and it's not a master plan, this is how the process that is available?
Yes, this is an applicant generated item for the council and goes through recommendations by the planning board and the planning staff, and finally the hearing examiner.
I didn't remember a Fed recommendation. There was not a Fed recommendation.
There was no Fed recommendation.
That's the next item.
Okay. And would you like to summarize the findings?
Well, Lynn Robinson is here representing the Office of the Hearing Examiner to present the recommendation to the council.
Good
Please,
morning.
Lynn. Good morning.
My name's Lynn Robison. I'm a hearing
Can
examiner.
you move the microphone in front of you? Yeah, it's on, but yeah, there we go.
I'm here to present Mr. Grossman's report and recommendation on LMA 129. It's an application by Montgomery Housing Partnership to redevelop property located on the west side of George Avenue, about a quarter of a mile north of Forest Glen Metro. They want to redevelop it with 220 dwelling units, and there is a binding element that mandates that at least 20% of the units be MPDUs. Their intent is to provide more, but at present that's the minimum that they're committing to. The planning staff, the planning board, as Jeff explained, and the hearing examiner held a hearing. They all recommended approval because it meets all the detailed standards of the zoning ordinance, which are set out in detail in the report and your proposed resolution. And there's no opposition to this case.
Okay.
Good. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I think we're good. If there's questions.
No questions, no. So,
Right, do we need a motion, Jeff?
yeah, well, I'll do that.
Okay,
Yeah, thank you.
Well, you're
Yeah.
not, you actually,
Yeah. We need a motion on this. Is someone going to move it?
so moved.
It's been moved and seconded. All those, this is a roll call vote, so please.
Mr. Glass?
Yes.
Mr. Glass votes yes. Mr. Jawando? Mr. Jawando votes yes. Mr.
I
Hucker?
need training wheels.
Mr. Hucker votes yes. Mr. Reamer? Yes. Mr. Reamer votes yes. Mr. Albornoz?
Yes.
Mr. Albornoz votes yes. Mr. Rice?
Yes.
Mr. Rice votes yes. Mr. Friedson?
Yes.
Mr. Friedson votes yes. Mr. Katz?
Yes.
Mr. Katz votes yes.
So it is unanimous by those who are present. Thank you very much, Ms. Robeson. The next item that we have is the work session, and it's an action item as well, on the Mark Rail Community Sector Plan, not the catchiest title that we've ever come up with, but, and I guess you will lead this off, Mr. Fed Chair?
Thank you, Council Vice President and Acting President Sidney Katz. Whatever. All right, so we're pleased to welcome our terrific team at the Park and Planning Commission. We've got the chair, Mr. Anderson, and a number of staff from the planning staff who have been working carefully on this plan for a number of years. And Pam and Glenn are here to talk about the different elements of the plan. The Fed Committee worked through the draft. There weren't a lot of challenging issues that we had to really discuss at length in the housing and zoning part of it. There were a couple of interesting issues that we worked on and got to resolution in the committee recommendation on the transportation side. The plan overall is looking at areas near MARC stations. The future of MARC as a transportation network, as a transportation resource in the county is something that we really need to do a lot more on, and MARC could be so much more. MARC could be like the kind of commuter rail that you'll find in other parts of the country, in New Jersey and New York, but we've got to make a lot of changes to the track infrastructure and the agreements about operating those tracks in order to get there. This plan doesn't really get into that as much, but it does anticipate more ridership in the future, and it addresses land use ideas for the planned station areas, as well as historic preservation issues around the station areas, and hopefully is going to lead very soon to some improvements in some of the immediate stations and their immediate areas as well. So why don't I turn it over to Pam to walk us through the packet, if we're starting with the housing side, the master plan.
Correct. For the item today, you'll see that Dr. Orland and I have broken it into parts. So part one is walking through the committee recommendation for land use, basically for the plan.
And let me also just pretext, we have three items, we have three packets. We have the land use, we have the transportation, and we have the resolution. And sometimes when we have a more controversial plan, we'll wait to do the resolution, and it'll come back to the council a couple weeks later. Because this one hasn't been controversial, we have the resolution before us today, and if the discussion today is smooth, then we can take action on the resolution, and we'll be finished with the plan.
Correct.
Okay.
So we'll start with the part one. I'm going to walk you through the plan recommendations. The MARC Rail Communities Plan recommendations are organized into 4 overarching planning principles that comprise the vision for Boyd's and for the Germantown communities. And these are connect, renew, preserve, and sustain. For each of these principles, the plan provides a series of goals and then associated recommendations for fulfilling the planned vision. These recommendations are area-wide, although some are very specific to Boyd's and Germantown. So how the review of the plan was conducted and how I walked through the committee recommendations was that we would go through each of these broad areas, we would look at the goals and then the recommendations under each goal. And where there was consensus on what the recommendation was coming out of the planning board and the committee, I've only noted that in your report. Rather than going through each one, I'd basically be rewriting the plan. And then I've highlighted the things where there was a discussion, and so that's how I'll proceed, but I'll go slow, and if you want to stop me to talk about anything, I'm fine with that.
One moment, Pam.
Go ahead, sure, please.
Thank you. I wanted to make just a very brief opening remark because a lot of this encompasses my district and because of the vision that we're looking for. And I was trying to wrap my head around how best to explain this for, as Councilmember Joando says, the millions that are watching at home. Essentially, I equate Germantown Mark Station to what we see at Shady Grove and the Metro Station. It really is, for us, the hub of transit in the Germantown area. We don't have a metro station. And so when I look at the opportunity for us to develop around that station, I see it similar. Of course, not the same intensity, obviously, because the surrounding arterials don't have the capacity to do that. But I do want us to approach it from that same perspective and same thought process in terms of how creative we were with what we did building around Shady Grove Metro. And so I think that this plan helps us to get to that place of really starting to understand the housing elements, the commercial and residential, all those pieces kind of coming together to create this place and this element. We've struggled for a long time in terms of having Germantown Town Center actually be the true center of Germantown. And it's been split between Milestone and Germantown Town Center, and then some at Kingsview, and some here, and some there. There have been all these kind of piecemeal approaches when really we've said as a county that transit is the thing that binds us and that really creates that spot. And so from that perspective, I really want to embrace and say thank you for really creating a vision that surrounds that and lifts that up as that center and hub that will be the core of Germantown. So thank you very much for that, and thank you for allowing me to make those opening remarks.
Thank you, Councilmember Rice. In fact, glad you raised some kind of contextualizing comments. Why don't we ask the planning department, staff, Chair Anderson, if you'd like to make any contextualizing remarks about the plan.
Well, I think when the planning board was dealing with this plan, one of the things we really struggled with was how to achieve better ridership for Mark, recognizing that it's not really an entirely suitable location for what most people would consider transit-oriented development, because there's not enough transit service there now in order to justify a lot of intensification to make it a separate center. But the problem is we need to avoid this chicken egg problem that there's not enough there in order to justify more service, and therefore there will be no service, and therefore there will be no justification for more development around the station. And this is where I come to the point that Councilmember Rice and I were engaged in that colloquy about parking, that ordinarily the planners would not support additional parking at a TOD location. That would sort of run at cross purposes. But this is a great example of how parking can sometimes be the bridge that gets us more ridership for transit. So both at the Boyd's Mark Station, which will never be a TOD location, and in Germantown, which we'd hope to see develop at some point to be, really almost part of the town center, certainly integrated with the town center. But in both cases, we could support additional ridership with more parking in the case of Germantown to try to make a transition to a different land use pattern. So I think this is a great example of how TOD is not a binary concept. It's not, well, there's appropriate locations for TOD, and then there's places then there's everything else. There are places that are gradations of transit plus development equals better quality of place. The other thing I'd say is that just like the Beers Mill plan, we introduced a lot of pretty aggressive attempts to provide better, not just safer, but more pleasant accommodations for pedestrians, particularly in this case because with the high school being rebuilt with even more students, and recognizing that there have been a couple of students killed in the last few years on 118 and in that area right around the town center, that it was essential that we try to slow down traffic in that area around Middlebrook and 118. So And the Fed Committee and Council and the Veers Mill Plan responded very favorably to our efforts to really turn the page on our balance between the pedestrian and bicycle infrastructure and accommodations and drivers. And I think in this case, the same thing was true at the Fed Committee, and I hope that you'll endorse this plan for largely the same reasons. And I think it's a great illustration of how we can manage vehicle throughput. We don't have to force everybody to get out of their cars in order to have safer and more pleasant accommodations for pedestrians. That pedestrian safety is not just for the urban centers, that it's important for every part of our county. Every neighborhood in our community deserves to have a place that's safe and attractive to walk, because it's essential to quality of life, not just to mobility, but also to property values, economic development goals, and to make sure that Germantown, just like the area around Silver Spring where I live or any other part of the county, is a place where you'd be comfortable sending your kids out to walk to the store, walk to school, get around. So I think this has really been exciting to see the council embrace these ideas, and really proud of the staff for all the work they've done. And I hope that at the end I could just thank them individually, but we could maybe wait for that.
Sure, and to your left you got, or to your right, Fred Boyd was the lead planner. Robert Cronenberg, no, not the lead planner. Was that Richard Weaver, or was that Roberto Duke?
Mr. Duke, who
okay,
doesn't
Mr. Duke?
actually look like me at all, it was the
well.
I didn't say he was you. I just said you were the lead planner.
Should we say he's pleased?
It's kind of an inside joke at the planning department. Don't call him Khalid. Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Anyway,
let's not go there.
I'll tell you the backstory.
Mr. Berliner has moved on, so I think we're safe.
Roberto was ably assisted by Leslie Seville.
Thank you, Leslie.
By Laura Hodgson, who did yeoman's work on a lot of our transportation stuff.
Terrific.
I just nodded when it was appropriate.
I'll do the same. Pam.
Okay, it might be helpful for the council to turn, if you have your plan in front of you, to turn to page 67. It's where we're going to start looking at the overarching principles and goals and related recommendations for land use. So the very first overarching principle is connect, and that will be covered by Dr. Orland. So moving on to renew, which is the one that starts on page 67. The first goal is to promote compatible infill development around the Boyds and Germantown MARC stations, while protecting existing residential uses, historically significant structures, and natural areas. And you'll see on that page there are area-wide recommendations which council staff and the committee reviewed and support those recommendations. The first recommendation with respect to the Boyd's part of the plan recommends preserving Boyd's historic fabric and village character to preserve the historic function as a gateway to the agricultural reserve. This broad recommendation is followed by 6 bullets, as you can see, that provide further guidance. The committee recommendation under the very first bullet, you'll see there is the sentence, retain existing uses throughout the Boyd's plan area. Just replacing retain existing uses with support existing and similar uses. Since plans tend to be of quite a long time frame, we're not sure we can retain the exact uses there today, but we want something there that is very similar. So that's just a modest text change. Turning to page 3 of the staff report for Germantown, on page, I think it's all the way over on, yes, page 70 are the recommendations. And again, the committee supports all of these recommendations to implement the first goal. Turning to page 77 is the second goal, which is to promote compact, walkable, context-sensitive development that supports the Boyds and Germantown MARC stations while protecting and reinforcing each community's scale, historic character, and sense of place. And again, there are area-wide recommendations which the committee supported. With respect to the Boyd's recommendations, again, the committee supported these recommendations to implement this goal. For Germantown, the second goal is to ensure that new building heights and transitions between the building heights are context-sensitive and compatible with the Germantown Historic District. In all but one of the recommendations related to height, the height matched the zoning. And so the committee's recommendation would be to delete the bullets referring to specific heights under this recommendation and then make the modification that you'll see on page 3 of the staff report, which adds language related to the one bullet where the committee felt that it was important to convey the plan's intent to protect Heights as it approaches the historic district. So if there's any questions on that, but the committee was unanimous on that.
Thanks.
And then they supported the other recommendations to implement the second goal. The third goal under Renew is to establish a network of attractive parks, public spaces, trails, community gathering places in the Boyds and Germantown communities to provide space for recreation and social interaction while enhancing the beauty and environmental quality of both communities. And the committee supported all of the area-wide Boyd-specific and Germantown-specific recommendations to implement the third goal.
Okay. Keep going, and then I think we'll invite council members, if they can hold their comments until after you get through all these. If you need to interject, that's totally fine too, but, okay, keep going. Pam.
Okay. The fourth goal is to provide high-quality schools and community facilities throughout the Boys and Germantown area. The committee, again, supported all of the recommendations within the plan for the area-wide Boys and Germantown-specific recommendations. And the fifth and last goal under Renew is to apply zoning to support the land use recommendations. And you'll see on page 4 of the staff report listed out the specific zoning recommendations, which are also in the plan on pages, for Boyd's, for pages 82 and 83. And with respect to Boyd's, the committee supported all of the zoning recommendations. Germantown, those recommendations are on pages 86 and 87. With respect to the zoning recommendations south of the railroad track, again, the committee supported all of those recommendations. For the area north of the railroad track, there were several recommendations. And if you'll turn to page 5 in the staff report, the only recommendation there is one related to the property that is just north of the station. And it has to do with the historic Pumphrey Martini House. The committee recommendation would be to rezone the Pumphrey Martini House from the commercial residential zone to the commercial residential neighborhood zone to ensure that existing and potential use of the historic property conforms to zoning. What was recommended from the planning board was just slightly too low of a commercial density to support what exactly is on the property today. So it's just a slight bump in commercial zoning to make sure that it's conforming to zoning. Continue on. For the rest of the property around that area within the same location, the recommendation is to rezone the Mark Station parking area from the commercial residential zone to the commercial residential town zone instead of the commercial residential neighborhood zone. The commercial residential neighborhood zone does not allow for parking structures, and so this is just a slight change to make sure you can accommodate a parking structure should you'd want one to be built there in the future. And then the last, the plan recommends reconfirming the Germantown Transit Mixed-Use Overlay Zone to prioritize the use of BLTs in this location. Again, the committee supported this recommendation.
Okay.
The next overarching area was to preserve. That was the goal of that section of the plan. And the first goal there was to retain, restore, and rehabilitate historic structures that contribute to the historic fabric of the communities. This is found on page 88. The council did receive some testimony from the Boyd's Historical Society supporting the preservation recommendations with respect to that community, including the preservation of the 1927 underpass. The committee supported the area-wide recommendations, and then with a look at Boyd's in particular, the recommendation that they did have a comment on, it had to do with a recommendation for making the 1927 underpass ADA compliant, and the committee just wanted to add the word to the extent feasible to that recommendation of bullet, recognizing that that is definitely an intent, but if for construction reasons they find that there's an alternative to ADA compliance that is not the underpass, that might be preferable just to leave that as a possibility in the future. And then with respect for Germantown, the committee was supportive of all the goals all the recommendations to implement the first goal under preserve. There are 3 more goals under preserve, and with respect to all of those 3, the committee was in support of all of the area-wide Boyd's and Germantown specific recommendations. And now we're on the last one, which is sustain. There were 3 goals. They're listed at the top of page 7. Preserve and enhance the area's natural assets and tree canopy, including designated best natural areas, protect and restore the area's water resources, and acknowledge the area's unusual geology, its influence on the area's natural character, and the constraint it imposes on development and infrastructure. And with respect to that, the committee supported all the area-wide Boyd's and Germantown recommendations. related to those goals. And the fourth goal was to manage infrastructure and utilities to ensure responsible growth, preserve community character, and safeguard public health. The committee recommendation was to support the area-wide recommendation for that. With respect to Boyd's, there had been a study in the 10-year comprehensive water and sewer supply plan where Boyd's was noted as having problems with its septic system due to ongoing system failures. There was a second recommendation in the plan that said if community sewer service is needed to safeguard public health, it should be limited to residential and institutional uses along Hoyles Mill Road and White Ground Road. Council staff recommended that perhaps adding the actual Mark Station property itself might be useful only if there's failures and it's for the public health that it might be needed. But again, we know that that property is being looked at for redevelopment to provide a real community asset for that community. It might need facilities, sewer facilities. So really only it's just adding that one property if there's a failure and it's deemed in the need for public health. And that concludes the overview, and now I'm happy to
Okay.
answer
I'll
any
turn it back to
questions.
the chair if there are comments on this section of our discussion.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Friedson, please.
Thank you for that. I appreciate the overview. I think it was a really good overview of the conversation. Although this wasn't the most controversial of master plans, I think that it reflected the importance of master plans in a few ways. One, understanding and appreciating the uniqueness of communities, that we deal with them on a community by community basis. This wasn't looked at in the same way that we would look at Silver Spring or Bethesda or the Pike District or some other areas. It is quite different, and I think also there are a lot of times when we get into these false choices, and I think Mr. Anderson's comments about, it really are about balance, and that we, treat, these things as competing priorities, and really they're complementary interests. And I think parking at the stations is a good example that normally we wouldn't be promoting single occupancy vehicles, but if that is a way that actually induces transit use, that serves many purposes. And I'm personally appreciative of planning staff and the planning board, council staff, and also all the community members, I see the Historic Society in the back there who've weighed in really heavily, and then also a lot of great work by the district council member, Mr. Rice, who really weighed in as a great advocate for the community, and our Fed colleagues. I think we came on this to a really good place, and I think while it treats every community independently and respects and appreciates the uniqueness of the communities, we also have some overarching policy goals, and they are part of this plan, Vision Zero goals, ensuring that we are prepared and hopefully can move forward with ensuring more transit by, really focusing on Mark and demonstrating that a shared street isn't at the expense of one user, it's to the benefit of all users. And so I think that, and as we look at, significant growth at Seneca Valley and other areas, wanting to make this a better community for everybody, I think is a really great place to be. And so I'm just appreciative of everybody's work, and I wanted to highlight that. And this was really a pleasurable experience to work on this, and to take our second bus tour out to these stations and see some of the most impressive historical communities in Montgomery County that I think are underappreciated and are just tremendous assets. Some of our great rural roads, and some of the historic private homes, and some of the great historic community institutions that have been part of the fabric of Montgomery County and part of the fabric of this particular community for a really long time, and figuring out a way of how we chart a path forward but protect the historic preservation and protect the historic integrity of how we got here and where we've been is, was just a really fun thing to be a part of. So I appreciate everybody's help and work on that.
Thank you very much. Councilmember Rice, please.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you, Councilmember Friedson, for acknowledging the beauty that exists in the Up County. It's one in which, just a bit of historical context, the inspiration for John Denver's Country Road song was Clopper Road. A little tidbit of history, just so that you have that, but there are a lot of history.
I have to sing it every week. Are you kidding?
for those colleagues who haven't been here and haven't heard that story, it's just one that but no, it's one in which we do a great job of preservation. And one of the challenges that we continue to have in the Up County continues to be the conversation around equity. And one of those regarding equity is our building lot termination requirements. And so while I sent out a memo to my colleagues yesterday regarding the 50% building lot termination requirement that's in the Germantown Transit Mixed Use Overlay Zone that's in the MARC Master Plan, I'm not going to make a motion today, as I understand this is a zoning code issue, and certainly it's something that we need to address holistically when we look at all of our BLTs throughout the county. So I'm okay with confirming it as is. But I will say this, it's just, we need to take a broader look. And the reason why is just an example that I listed in my example. The Marriott building in downtown Bethesda that was a 2.25 acre site with approximately 1 million square feet of development, has a 2.38 BLT requirement. Century, that developed in Germantown, who has twice the size, 2 million square feet, has a 13.57 BLT requirement. And so it's very interesting to me that there's this inequity that continues to exist and certainly has an impact on development in Germantown. And so from that perspective, while I certainly don't want to impact my farmers and my agricultural community negatively, we need to spread that throughout the county. Everybody is responsible for retaining our agricultural reserve, not just Germantown. And so from that perspective, Mr. Vice President, I look forward to us on a day, hopefully sooner rather than later, having this greater conversation around the best ways to continue supporting our agricultural reserve and our ag community and making sure that we're fair and equitable to Germantown. So thank you.
And I know we all want to do that as well. Councilmember Reamer, please.
Thanks. And Councilmember Friedson also highlighted this issue. We will take it up at a Fed session this summer and look at the BLT program generally. I think it's just a topic of ongoing concern, and we could use some more dialogue about it. So we'll put it on the Fed schedule.
Ms. Dunn, did you want to continue on, please, or?
I've actually finished my piece of this. We'll turn it over to Dr. Orland.
Dr. Orland, please.
Thank you.
Thank you. In the interest of time, I think I'm just going to hit on the changes the Fed Committee is recommending to the plan, which are very few, actually.
Okay.
And also in the interest of my voice, which seems to be giving out. On page 3 of the second part of page 2 of 4B, the plan endorses the road diets that are in the plan, namely reducing Middlebrook Road from 6 lanes to 4 lanes between Great Seneca Highway and Route 118, and also in the no longer recommending widening Great Seneca Highway itself between Middlebrook Road and south of the tracks. That would be a road diet as well, although it's not any reducing additional existing lanes, just doesn't widen the road further. DOT had pointed out that in their analysis, they're not sure that a 6-lane cross-section could be reduced to 4-lane without causing major delays, particularly at the intersection of 118, in the longer-term future, not right now. And so the plan's recommended change on the bottom of page 3, first of all, it includes a midterm improvement, which you'll see on Circle 15, which does reduce the number of lanes from 6 lanes to 4, but it's sort of an interim type of improvement. It doesn't reconstruct the roadway, reconstruct the curbs or the drainage. It creates 2-lane separated bike lanes on each side of the road, but separated from the other lanes with flex posts and a small median. If in the long term it's shown that by DOT study that in fact going to 4 lanes will be a problem, then there is another cross-section, which is in Appendix C, which keeps the 6 lanes but narrows them somewhat more. It still retains a 2-way cycle track on one side of the road rather than both sides of the road. In fact, most places we had cycle tracks. We usually only have it on one side anyway. and make some other compromises to the right-of-way so that it all fits.
Okay.
And then on Circle.
Wait, let's.
But just to finish the point, on page
Okay, yeah.
58, you'll see what the desired long-term cross-section is, which is 4 lanes. This is figure 32, which is 4 lanes with, again, 2-lane cycle tracks on both sides of the road and ample widths for sidewalks and landscaping.
Thank you.
Sorry.
No, thanks. I just wanted to highlight this issue. This was probably the biggest transportation topic that we took up. With the renovation and expansion of Seneca Valley High School, as Mr. Rice mentioned, we're going to have about 1,000 more students attending school there. And so it's going to have a big impact. And I think we want biking and walking to be a safe, comfortable option for everyone, but I think we have a kind of an urgency around students. And so what the analysis has showed is that today it would be no problem at all in terms of traffic impacts to have this safety kind of remodeling of the road, not moving the curbs, not getting into stormwater infrastructure, but just, fitting the traffic into 4 lanes instead of 6, and then having space for better sidewalk and bike infrastructure. The concern was if the Germantown area builds out to the maximum capacity that was zoned years ago, then there would be potentially a lot more vehicles on the road, and then you might get very extensive, just say a lot of congestion. But I think that we can keep our eye on that. That's potentially a long way down the road. And in the short and midterm, there's not really a concern about it. So, there is development happening in Germantown, which is terrific, but it has been zoned to the hilt, right? I mean, Germantown is envisioned as one of the big commercial centers of Montgomery County, actually. So there's a lot there. And so if we were to get to that level, then, we can have a discussion. Or when we seem like we're on track to that level, then we should talk about probably a lot of issues, frankly. But in the short to midterm, Germantown's growth rate is positive, but it's not like we're going to be hitting that 2040 vision in the next 5 or 10 years. So that's kind of where we netted out. We looked into this pipeline issue of what the pace of development is, and meanwhile we have this kind of immediate now. When does the school open again? Fall of 2020. So a year from this September, there's going to be a lot more families dropping kids off, a lot more pedestrian conflict, a lot more kids driving themselves, a lot more kids looking to bike from Germantown Town Center or adjacent neighborhoods. And it's a great opportunity to kind of leap into action. And in fact, I'd like to see, as we follow up at DOT, how can we ensure that whatever changes we're envisioning here are in place when that school reopens, so that we don't, open off on a sad note.
Thank you. Councilmember Rice, please.
Thank you. So let me pick up on right where you left off, Councilmember Reamer, and you are correct. Capacity at Seneca Valley will go from about 1,300 to 2,400 students. The size of Seneca Valley, physical size, would actually be the largest high school in the state of Maryland. So there's capacity for that to grow even larger. But let me just say this. I've had a number of conversations with both the school board and the superintendent about some of the challenges. I support all of the methodology that's been proposed when it comes to the road diet and making sure that pedestrian safety is tantamount. I think that's incredibly important. While I've not been a big fan of double cycle tracks, I do feel as though some sort of protected bicycle lane makes sense for us. I will say this, when it comes to the safety of our students, I just can't envision an engineering feat for us to support that. And so from that perspective, I've actually moved to a different position where I think that we should bus all of our students that are going to Seneca Valley, and we'll be requesting as such over the summer. We do it with some of our other high schools where it's a continuous challenge for us, and it's one in which we've seen a number of incidents that have happened. I think that, again, when you're looking at the major crossroads that folks have to go, one of the ones that's not mentioned often is Father Hurley. And Father Hurley is where a lot of our contingent of high school students have to cross down Middlebrook, crossing across Father Hurley, which is also very unsafe. You've got 6 lanes at that point because you've got turning lanes also in addition to the through lanes. And so from that perspective, you've got potentially 3 major intersections that students in Germantown have to walk through: Father Hurley, Middlebrook and 118, and Middlebrook and Great Seneca. And so from that perspective, I really just can't see us coming up with something respectfully to our engineers that really will continue to ensure their safety. And so I think that for us, we may need to start having that conversation. So I just wanted to put that out there. It doesn't mean that we don't have other pedestrians who are still using that. We have office buildings and banks and all kinds of other things that are there that certainly will. And of course, students won't always ride the bus. They'll still go to the shopping centers and things like that. So all of those things need to happen. But from a school perspective, I do think that that is the next step for us. So just wanted to let you know.
Thank you
Hot
very-
off the press.
Thank you very much, Dr. Orland.
Thank you. On page 4, the next item is just a clarification that is sort of part of the road diet. There's not going to be there'll be some restrictions on the widening of Germantown Road 118 just north of the tracks, but to not preclude what the plan also calls for, which is to increase the number of approach lanes for Bowman Mill Road to 3 lanes. And the language top of page 4 does that. In the middle of page 4, there is a map in the plan showing the extension of Bowman Mill Road over to Great Seneca Highway. It's shown as sort of a dashed straight line. Problem is that it crosses 2 water features, just like a golfer. You want to go around them, you don't want to go over them. This basically says that it'll be a route between Great Seneca Highway and 118, but it probably won't be a straight line. It'll probably involve some jogs. The next item near the bottom of page 4, there's a proposal to extend Walter Johnson Road, where it dead ends now, up to Middlebrook Road. The plan has it shown coming into Middlebrook Road, very close to the intersection of 118. DOT pointed out, and the Fed Committee agreed, that that intersection should be at least 100 feet away from 118, provide adequate separation, and to be clear in the plan, this is a right-in, right-out situation, not allowing left turns in and out of that location. And then going to page 5, shifting over to Boyd's, the plan calls for a relocation of Clopper Road so that it goes underneath the railroad tracks and ties back into to Clarksburg Road north of the tracks. DOT points out that it may be that an overpass would be more cost effective, given that it doesn't require maintenance of traffic for the railroad itself. And so they encouraged, and the committee agreed, to include both options in the plan, but acknowledging that, at least at this point in time, the Boyd's community prefers the underpass option. And it's the final point, is very minor. It just points out that there's an illustrative map showing what the Boyd's Mark Station might look like. DOT's in the process the next several months finalizing the plan, and the point here is that if that plan is finalized before the planning board goes to print on this plan, that final plan should be what goes into the diagram rather than the illustrative of it. And otherwise, the committee entirely agrees with everything else in the plan.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. So the next item we have actually is the resolution itself. And the committee has
Staff is recommending.
right, the staff recommends approval of the resolution, but so did the committee. So with that, it's strictly a hand vote. All those in favor, please say aye, or raise your hand. Aye. Yeah, and also raise your hand, yeah. One person followed the rules. I'm very impressed. Thank you very much. That is unanimous by those present. Thank you.
Turn it to Casey real quick. Does
What?
he still want to?
Oh, Casey, did you want to do the Academy Awards here. Did
Well,
you?
Mr. Reamer covered most of it, but again, this crew is really great, and we have some fantastic staff. It's very, I've been here long enough. I was just telling Laura Hodgson, who had a baby.
If you could turn to the mic so that we can hear you.
I was just telling Laura Hodgson, who had a baby not too long ago, that I've been doing this long enough to see some of our planning staff come into the agency single and then get paired up and then have children. And just the other day, some of them came in for Bring Your Child to Work Day. So that's a little disturbing in some ways for me.
When they bring the grandchild in, that's another.
That's really, or when their children start to come to work as planning staff.
Yeah,
That's
okay, I'm just saying.
That hasn't happened yet. But it is, in all seriousness, it's fantastic to see some of our folks who started as maybe their first or second job out of graduate school really emerge as stars. And we certainly have a lot of stars on this team, and
Sure do.
just wanted to recognize them. So
Thank you very
all.
much, and thanks for all that you do. Did you? No. Thank you.
Thank
We
you.
are going to adjourn, and then we come back at 1:30 for public hearings. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is a public hearing on expedited Bill 9-19, Consolidated Retiree Health Benefits Trust, delegation of duties. This bill would authorize the Board of Trustees to delegate certain duties to certain county employees in its written policies and procedures, and generally amend the laws governing the management of the Consolidated Retiree Health Benefits Trust. A GO committee work session is tentatively scheduled for Thursday, June 20th. Persons wishing to submit additional material for the council's consideration should do so before the close of business, June 17th, so that your views can be included in the material which staff will prepare for the committee's recommendation. If you would like to follow the progress of a council bill, the council website has a subscribe function. Go to the council's website and use the View Council Records and Legislative Updates link to learn how. And so for this particular item, we have one speaker, Ms. Linda Herman.
Good afternoon. For the record, I'm Linda Herman, the Executive Director of the Montgomery County Employee Retirement Plans. I'm here today on behalf of the Board of Trustees who oversee the assets of the Consolidated Retiree Health Benefits Trust to testify in support of Bill 919. The proposed bill would amend the county code to permit the board to delegate its duties as the board deems prudent and consistent with its fiduciary duties and its written policies and procedures. In 2012, the County Council approved similar legislation for the Board of Investment Trustees who oversee the county's retirement plans. The county code establishes the Board of Trustees and provides the board the power to invest the assets of the Consolidated Retiree Health Benefits Trust and describes other actions to be taken. The board has been advised by its legal counsel that the delegation of duties is permitted under common law. However, the board's counsel has advised them that the delegation authority should be provided in its governing document, the county code. Numerous retirement plans, including the county's retirement plans and the state of Maryland pension system, currently provide for the boards overseeing the investment of trust fund assets to delegate certain functions to staff. This bill would allow for a similar delegation of duties by granting the board the authority to delegate as it deems appropriate and consistent with its fiduciary duties and its written policies and procedures. The board will retain the authority to grant or remove the delegation as it deems prudent. We look forward to working with the council in its deliberations on this legislation.
Thank you so much. I don't see any lights, so this public hearing is closed. Item number 6, it's a public hearing on a special appropriation to the FY19 capital budget and amendment to the Montgomery County Public Schools FY19 to 24 capital improvement program in the amount of $7,500,000 for current replacements and modernizations. For this particular item, we have Mr. Mark Exting. Can you please press the button at the base of the microphone? Thank you.
For the record, my name is Mark Eckstein, and I live a few blocks from here on 12 Bentana Way. Good afternoon, President Navarro and Vice President Katz and the council members. I am here as a member of the MCC PTA about an issue that came before us a few months ago regarding this issue related to the special appropriation. And it's our understanding that about $2 million of this special appropriation was going to be taken from the bathroom renovations, the restroom renovations within MCPS. And although upon watching the committee meeting for the Education Committee, I know this is pretty much a done deal in terms of the budget. What we're looking to do is find out a little bit more information about how this $2 million was or was not used, and just trying to flesh out the details of that. I'm also the chair of the MCCPA LGBT subcommittee, and we work with a lot of students, and continually the students ask about these restrooms. And we've discussed with some of you, the guidelines are a bit vague when it comes to the existing renovation policies. They mention things like existing facilities should be renovated, and bearing in mind certain students' safety and consideration, the Department of Facility Management should do this. So what we're looking for is if this money was taken away from restrooms and restroom renovations, just a little bit more detail on how that money was supposed to be used and if it was used effectively. So it's less of a budget concern and more just of an oversight. So just in conclusion, sometimes we get caught up in the numbers and the dollars of it all, and I just want to be here to represent the students, to keep in mind that these are students that really use these restrooms, and it's a very critical function for them. So to summarize, I would just hope to provide more information, work with the school system to provide information on this. So thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much. I don't see any lights, so this public hearing is closed. Okay, so now we're on to the rest of our work this afternoon. We're going to start with item number 7. This is a work session on the FY20 operating budget, compensation and benefits for all agencies. Then we'll move to number 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, and some of this will be done in block as well. And I know that we're going to begin on items 7 and 8. Mr. Howard and Mr. Trumpkin have put together this particular packet, and what I like to do, because we have already gone through many of these items, we already held a work session last week, obviously, is to then get to the decision points that we need to address. And before doing that, I just want to remind everybody on some of the conversations that we have had in terms of the work ahead for the council when it comes to issues of sustainability and also predictability and clarity, because even though we are hearing some positive news, I think, on the national level regarding the economy, we continue every single year to have to address a lot of structural issues in terms of budget. And I don't think that is useful not only for the services that we're trying to provide, but also in terms of predictability for our employee organizations that work so hard to negotiate agreements. And so we, I think, all have pledged right after the budget to work on starting to review some ways that we can put forth some structural pieces that then will be able to set certain parameters and then certain targets so that when we are not only adopting budgets, but also in terms of what we need to give our employees in terms of raises for their very hard work, that we're all working roughly within the same parameters and the same percentages. There seems to be a disconnect, I think, that I thought it was just going to be something temporary. It has become kind of an annual exercise, and we don't want to have to do that every year. So I do commend some of the proactive work that has been put in place already to identify some of those items. I also look forward to working with the administration on some of their particular areas regarding structuring, but also looking at some fiscal indicators and some of the investments that we're making in some of our funds to see if we are actually hitting the right targets there as well. This is a very complex $5.6 billion budget, and for some reason, at least for me, every year it seems like the need just continues to grow And it seems like we're always struggling to address that. So I do think that this is a good moment to kind of pause, push the refresh button, and agree on a different way forward of addressing the budget writ large, how we fund the budget, where does the money come from, but also how do we do everything possible to retain and also compensate this extraordinary workforce that our residents rely on. So we'll work through the packet. I'm going to say in the offset that I think there is a particular item in the negotiated agreements that we believe has to be restructured somewhat. It still maintains, in terms of our understanding, the desire for a target of at least a 5.9 or so increase that we can work with. But we're also open to see how that can be restructured going forward. And this is one particular item, and we'll get to that in the subsequent packet. With that, Mr. Howard, I'll turn it over to you, and then we'll stop at each decision point to address everything that we need to do.
Sure. So the first of the council decision points on compensation and benefit for all agencies is the long-term compensation cost sustainability that we discussed last week. And the staff recommendations were to address long-term sustainability would be to support options 1A through 1D, which were identified by council staff last week and are on pages 32 and 33 of the packet. And then additionally, as part of option 1C, add a request that staff explore options to shift contributions that would otherwise have gone to employee retirement plans to OPEB once the retirement plans are fully funded.
Correct. So as you see on page 32 and 33, there are a number of recommendations, and they have to do with assessing long-term fiscal sustainability of compensation costs, requiring examination of both the revenue and expenditure sides of the equation. It also includes formalizing structures to annually review compensation cost sustainability and communicating the findings to the executive, reviewing the legal regulatory policy framework related to compensation cost to identify changes that could help address long-term sustainability, also reviewing the benefit costs across agencies, specifically looking at OPEB and group insurance and retirement, and also working with the executive on the issue of workforce size. It was also alluded that, you know, once we reach 100% in terms of our pension fund, that we would like to explore using those additional dollars actually to go back into OPEB, because it is not sustainable for us to continue to rely on OPEB to fund the budgets. And so that is another area that is included on there. I wanted to, I'll turn over to Councilmember Reamer, has his light on, but what I'd like to do is for the council, without objection, to signal whether these are a number of areas that they desire to address right after the budget. I see a lot of nodding, so I say without objection. Councilmember Reamer.
Just wanted to express appreciation for these recommendations. I think it will be incredibly useful to the county executive branch, the council branch, and to our partners in the unions to have a regular dialogue about affordability and revenues and expenses to help guide the collective bargaining process and ensure that the bargain agreements are hewing to what we all can accept or is an affordability framework. So the idea of a regular review is just one of several of the proposals here, but initiating this conversation about workforce size, I think that's fantastic. Executives talked a lot about that. Reviewing benefit costs across agencies, looking at a lot of different issues, and just keeping this dialogue going. I think it's going to help launch a lot of good conversations, as well as kind of keep the conversation moving forward constructively and help inform all of us in our deliberations. So just wanted to signal that I think that is a particularly useful set of recommendations.
Okay. Councilmember Rice? Oh, sorry. Okay, so Mr. Howard.
Okay. The next set of decision points is on agency group insurance costs, and these are on pages 16 through 22 of the packet from last week. And the staff recommendations are to support the agency's FY20 tax-supported request for active employee costs, support the FY20 tax-supported pay-as-you-go requests for retiree costs, support the executive's FY20 OPEB, recommended OPEB pre-funding amounts, support the recommended FY20 projection for the county government's employee health benefits self-insurance fund of $272.9 million,
and then encourage MCPS to take further efforts to move toward aligning the group insurance premium cost share for active employees with the cost share established by county government.
Okay, I need a motion of those in block.
So moved.
Moved by Councilmember Katz, seconded by Councilmember Reamer. All those in favor, please raise your hand. It's unanimous. Thank you. Okay, item 3.
All right. Our third issue is the FY19 OPEB savings plan sent over by the county executive, and that's on page 21 of the staff report. The FY19 OPEB savings plan proposed by executive would reduce the FY19 budget by $89.6 million from the amounts that were originally allocated to OPEB pre-funding. Council staff notes that a decision to support a savings plan that is less than the executive recommended or proposed would reduce available resources in the FY20 budget by the same amount.
Correct. I need a motion and a second.
So moved.
Moved by Councilmember Katz, seconded by Councilmember, is it Rice? Rice. Councilmember Reamer.
Thanks. I just wanted to ask a little more. So there has been conversation about ways that we could identify funds to partially restore the FY19. Can you just please help me understand? Those could be taken, what would be the process for additional funding? I know the council president sent around a memo, just outline the process for providing additional savings back to the FY19 amount.
Marlene, you want to address that?
Yes, to the extent it's dealing with the excess pension funds, we believe that possibly as early as the end of FY20, we may reach 100% funding in the pension. We don't know exactly when that's going to happen, but the idea behind the council president's motion is as soon as that happens, rather than taking those funds and moving them into services, they should be moved to OPEB, in part because we could go back to a couple of years later having to make additions to the pension fund once again. So you wouldn't want to invest those funds in reoccurring expenditures. Better to invest in OPEB. It's also a chance to finally bring that fund back up. But that would happen at a later date this summer as part of the comprehensive review of all these fiscal issues. The council would work out what the process would be and the requirements to ensure that that would happen.
That the only measure, though? Are there other measures that we can, aren't there other measures we can take to restore FY19 OPEB funds?
If the council wants to do that, you need to identify the resources this year.
This summer, we can still take the issue up this summer, right?
Yeah, absolutely. We can continue to take it. We will be looking this summer at a whole range of issues to help examine what is the appropriate OPEB contribution, how can you ensure it happens. So there'll be a range of measures we look at that time. It will not affect, by that point, FY19 would be over, so it wouldn't affect the FY19 contribution, but it may very well the FY20 and beyond.
Correct. Okay. Thank you. Councilmember Friedson?
Yeah, just to speak to that, I mean, one of the recommendations was, or one of the thoughts that has been raised is the idea of requiring regular payments into the OPEB trust. And the benefit to that is that we wouldn't get to a situation where at the end of the year, there is a large sum of money that doesn't affect operating programs that can be redirected at the end of the year to gloss over serious budget challenges. And unfortunately, the OPEB trust has been used in recent years, not just by this particular administration, but by the previous administration as well, as basically a reserve account to solve end of the year, serious budget shortfalls. And that spiral that we've gotten into has been a huge challenge and something that I don't think that we get out of unless we make some structural changes. And so I look forward to having that conversation in the summer to make some serious and structural changes to make sure that these commitments that we have are protected financially, to make sure that we can afford the budget within the framework that we have it. The reality is that we all know we owe the money whether we fund it or not, and the longer we wait to fund it, the more expensive it gets, and the more that it becomes in competition directly with programs, which I know nobody wants, and we get out of the spiral that we have fallen into where we're funding ongoing expenses with these one-time savings, despite the fact that we still have those costs.
I want to point out to my colleagues that on page 33, the first action that we took without objection included this particular recommendation. So the council already adopted this as another way that we can address some of the issues regarding OPID funding, and it's page 33 in the middle. Okay, with that, Mr. Howard.
All right, the next item is the FY20 allocations for retirement.
All right.
Oh, I'm sorry. I think we need to vote on the OPEB savings
Oh,
plan.
we do.
Sorry.
That's true. All those in favor, please raise your hand. All right, that's unanimous. Oh, that would be Councilmember Albornoz, Councilmember Rice, Councilmember Katz, Councilmember Navarro, Councilmember Hucker, Reamer, Jawando, and Glass opposed. Opposed? Councilmember Friedson. Okay, thank you.
Okay, now we'll move on to the FY20 allocations
That's
for
right.
retirement. These are on pages 13 to 15 and 25 to 28 of the packet, and the recommendations are as follows. First, to approve the recommended total FY20 county contribution for the county government retirement programs, $72.3 million for the employees' retirement system, $18.8 million for the retirement savings plan, and $6.9 million for the guaranteed retirement income plan. Second, approve the recommended FY20 administrative and operating budgets of the ERS, the RSP, the Deferred Compensation Plan, and the Consolidated Retiree Health Benefits Trust. Third, to continue to monitor the funded ratio of the agency's pension funds. And fourth is to encourage MCPS to achieve savings in retirement costs as set forth in OLO Memorandum Report 2016-5 MCPS Local Pension Plan and Supplement.
Okay, is there a motion to adopt these in block? Moved by Councilmember Jawando, and second by Councilmember Rice. All those in favor, please raise your hand. And that is unanimous.
All right, the next issue is our other compensation issues, the kind of leftover miscellaneous things that the council needs to approve. So there are two components to this. The first is to approve the executive's recommended FY20 funding for the Compensation and Employee Benefits Adjustments NDA, the Consolidated Retiree Health Benefits Trust NDAs, Group Insurance Retiree NDA, Montgomery County Employee Retirement Plans NDA, State Position Supplement NDA, and State Retirement Contribution NDA. And the second component is to support the agency's FY20 funding requests for employee awards and tuition assistance programs.
Okay, is there a motion to adopt this in
So moved.
block? Councilmember Vice President Katz, second. Is there a second? Second. Councilmember Rice. All those in favor, please raise your hand. And that is unanimous.
The next item is pay adjustments in other agencies. And while final action on all these items will be taken up when the specific agency budgets are taken up by the council, the recommendation is just to indicate support for funding within the MCPS, college, park and planning, and WSSC budgets for the requested allocation for compensation. And also note that the MNC, PPC, and WSSC pay adjustments will be determined at the May 9th bi-county meeting with the Prince George's County Council.
That's correct. Without objection, we can signal intent to support. Okay.
Okay, the next item is the new salary schedule for non-merit employees that we discussed last week, and that is on pages 29 and 30 of the staff report. And so the recommendation is to consider action on the executive's proposed FY20 salary schedule for non-merit employees, and the council's options today are to approve, reject, or defer this topic for further review.
Okay, and this is a GO item. I think that we obviously are going to have to defer because we don't have the information in front of us, but we'll be taking this up as well. So unless there are any objection regarding this, we will defer this item and then take it up in GO.
Right.
Okay, that's fine.
Okay, and then the last item in this part of the packets for items 7 and 8 is just pay adjustments for county government non-represented employees. And the recommendation here is just to support equity and pay adjustments for non-represented employees with other employee groups when final budget decisions are made, consistent with longstanding county practice.
Is there any objection with that? No objections, so we will adopt that. Okay.
And that's it for those items.
Those items. All right. So now we're moving on to item number 9. And I think my colleagues should have a chart there as well. But we're going to first turn it over to Mr. Drummer to explain the issue of group insurance benefits.
Thank you. You actually have 4 agreements in front of you for decision today. The agreements are with the three employee groups, the McGeo agreement, the FOP agreement, and the IAFF agreement, and you also have the agreement with the Montgomery County Volunteer Fire Association. With regard to the group insurance, you've already decided to approve the group insurance as it was submitted in the executive's FY20 budget, which means or corresponding action on the agreements would be to reject the group insurance provisions that are which are slightly more generous in each of the three employee agreements, the McGeo, FOP, and the IAFF. In 2011, the council rejected the provisions in each of these collective bargaining agreements and instituted for ease of reference, they went from the 80-20 split to the 75-25 split, unless you're in an HMO. And that's been something that the council has approved each year since 2011. And each year, the agreements continue to say 80-20, and each year the council has rejected those provisions and instituted the 75-25. So your action today is consistent with what you've done since 2011. But you need to actually take an action to reject the group insurance provisions as they're stated in the McGeo, the IAFF, and the FOP agreements.
Okay, is there a motion for that rejection? Moved by Councilmember Reamer, seconded by Councilmember Katz. All those in favor, please raise your hand. And so that takes care of that particular item. And this is just very symbolic because this is something that we've been doing for years. Okay. So then now we're going to move on to the rest. All right, Councilmember, so now we're on to the rest of the chart. Is that where we are? Mr. Drummer, anything else? Okay, Councilmember Rice.
Thank you, Madam President. Our county executive sent us over a McGeo contract with a proposed $14.84 million impact in FY20. To ensure sustainability, the executive, as well as McGeo, should have an opportunity to modify the package to make it less costly. I propose that the executive reopen bargaining to reduce the fiscal impact of the McGeo contract for FY20 and beyond by seeking parity with pay raises similar to those negotiated for employees in other bargaining units, such as the 5.9% negotiated for other employees. Therefore, I move that, except for the group insurance for FOP and IAFF bargaining unit members, the council approve each provision subject to council review in the agreements with the FOP, the IAFF, and the MCVFRA, and that the council reject each of the provisions of the McGeo contract that are subject to council review.
Is there a second? Second by Councilmember Reamer. Okay. All those in favor of, all right. Seconded by Councilmember Reamer. Councilmember Reamer.
I just want to say, for all of our McGeo members who are here today, you deserve a raise. You're going to get a raise. You work hard. You're going to get raise. Actually, don't know what mine is, but you deserve a raise. You're going to get a raise. Okay?
Okay, we really do need to finish the meeting. I just want, I'm sorry. Okay. We can either sit here and do this, or we can finish the meeting. The reality is that what the council is signaling is that we would like to make sure that McGeo receives the same range of a raise percentage that the other negotiated agreements, which could be up to 5.9. We're also saying that they can have the flexibility, and Mr. Wren, we've spoken about this, to go back and within that flexibility, address what they need to be addressed. The person that said, when will you get the raise? You will get it when we finalize our budget, like everybody else, okay? Thank you. The county council has the final say in the charter regarding this vote. If we didn't, we wouldn't be here. Appreciate it. That's quite all right. We've been here, done that. So we would like our employees to receive a very generous raise, and that target of a 5.9 is quite generous. This is what the other unions are negotiating as well, and we hope that that will happen as well. So with that, all those in favor, please raise your hand. And that would be unanimous. Thank you. It was seconded. With that, we are adjourned.